All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's presentation regarding our referenda questions coming up on the ballot on April 6th. Appreciate you coming. There'll be opportunities to get my contact information for questions and so forth here towards the end of the program. For those of you that are joining us online, welcome. And also this will be recorded and also accessible via our district YouTube channel. And so it can be viewed virtually at any time. So we'll get right started. First off, you may be hearing some things in the community and some commentary around a baseball-softball quadplex. Part of the reason that I bring that up at this time is because it is not related to any referenda questions that we intend to ask. Once again, not related in any way, shape, or form. However, it is related to Lincoln High School and Lincoln High School property. And as is indicated here on the slide, you can see that there is plans in the works that is being funded via marketing opportunities, fundraising, and then of course a generous grant from the Legacy Foundation, among others, to construct a roughly $8 million quadplex complex here on Lincoln High School property. That includes 2 baseball diamonds, 2 softball diamonds, a concession stand, restrooms, and so forth, track renovation, and potential of adding turf to the football field at Southwood County 2000. That's an exciting project that is ongoing. If folks are interested, there is opportunities still at donating and marketing and so forth opportunities. For more information on that, you can visit rapidspride.com. Once again, that is not related to any of the referendum questions that we're asking. However, it is a very nice project that we have in the works as a result of a significant community collaboration. Here's a rendering of what the finished product will look like. And yet another one. And with that, we'll move on into the portion around the referenda questions and why you'd be spending the time either here in attendance or watching the video. So first off, there's going to be 2 questions. One is an operational, a levy override question, and the second question is a bond issue or a debt issue question. And those are for operational needs, safety and security, and of course educational space improvements. The entirety of this presentation will be to go through specifics on what we mean about each of those questions and all of the parts and pieces that are included there. So question 1 asks for authorization to exceed the revenue limit by $2 million a year for 5 years, beginning with next school year and ending in the 25-26 school year. And in general, that's for technology and curriculum updates district-wide. Once again, I'll get into some additional specifics and details on that topic. Question 2 is a $34 million bond issue question, and that would be for the construction of secure entrances at all of our schools, a renovation at Lincoln High School of science labs, and an addition of a new student resource center, student resource area, a construction of a gym at Think Academy, which is Rudolph Elementary, as well as other capital maintenance and building infrastructure improvements. And we'll go through specifically virtually every aspect of what's included in that $34 million bond issue and what it means in terms of each individual building. On the front end, I think it's worth pointing out, and I will get into more detail on this topic at the conclusion of the presentation, but we're positioned such that, and as I've said before, with the referenda, timing is everything. And we are positioned such that as an organization based on financial planning, the defeasance of existing debt, and other business practices, that if both of these questions passed, the overall tax impact is estimated to be flat, and that is the school portion of your taxes. So once again, we'll go into more detail, but I can't emphasize enough, if both of these questions pass, there's no projected increase in school-based property tax. And again, we'll get into the nuance of why that's possible here as we move through the presentation. There might be a question about why 2 questions and only 2 questions. First off, under state statute, you have to separate a levy override question, and that would be the $2 million for 5-year levy override question. That has to be a separate question from any bond issue question. Furthermore, you can only ask up to 2 questions per election cycle, because in the past, voters may remember that if you had a multiple project-focused debt issue question, you'd actually see that in a lot of cases broken up into perhaps 2 or 3 or 4 questions. So you might have in the past saw question 1, should we do secure entrances, yes or no? Question 2, should we add a gym to Think Academy, yes or no? Question 3, should we renovate Lincoln High School science classrooms, yes or no? And in this case, we are no longer allowed to do that. So they're all kind of lumped into one, this $34 million bond issue. Question 1 around the levy override, $2 million a year for 5 years, is the question around basic operations. And in a general sense, those dollars are going to be utilized for curriculum and technology updates district-wide. Once again, I have some details as we move through the program about what specifically we're talking about, in addition to what some rough costs are associated with those things, as well as what our plans are over the next few years if, in fact, the referendum were to pass. For curriculum, a few examples. In a general sense, and looking at kind of a historic spending levels around curriculum purchases, we've spent around $200,000 to $540,000 per year over the last several years for purchasing of curricular content areas. And now this would include things like textbooks and workbooks and things along those lines. It can also include subscriptions to technology-based or online programs. And in most cases, it's a combination of those two things. So again, that's about $200,000 to $540,000 per year as we update our curriculum. Over the last several years, based on our curriculum purchasing cycle, every content area, every level has been updated. And that is the continued plan as we move forward. I think it goes without saying that if you have outdated curriculum, you also have then outdated practices in classrooms and so forth, and we're not up to speed with respect to 21st century standards or the standards of the expectations in schools today. Other aspects of curriculum purchasing are renewals of annual licensing and educational management software. That comes in at roughly $320,000 per year and growing. Some examples of those, printing and network, archiving, Canvas, Seesaw, managed print services securely. So there's a number of things that are supportive of curriculum and supportive of the student and classroom environment that are more technology-based than curriculum-based, but nonetheless, it's part and parcel of what ongoing costs are that would be funded by this levy override question. What are you referencing when you're talking about technology? And I emphasize that the list that I'm showing you here on the screen is not an exhaustive list, so this is not absolutely everything to come up with the total that you see there at the bottom, but just gives you kind of an overview picture of what we're talking about. Classroom audio and microphone systems estimated at $400,000 district-wide, replacing smartboards. For many taxpayers and parents, you probably remember the idea of putting smartboards into classrooms back maybe 15 or so years ago. Those smartboards and what a smartboard is an interactive whiteboard, right? So touch sensitive, and interactive. Those smartboards are no longer supported, so the software isn't supported. You can't download updates and continue to use the smartboard as you could in the past, so those need to be replaced with interactive touch-sensitive displays. What they look like now is more like a flat-screen TV versus a whiteboard, and that's kind of the wave of the future. Estimated there at about $1.5 million to replace those throughout the district. And then you have like student-based technology. So student iPads at the 4K through second grade level, estimated cost $600,000. Chromebook cards for elementary students in third through fifth grade, $375,000. Continuing our one-to-one program at Lincoln High School in Rams, where each student's given a Chromebook, that averages anywhere between $105,000 to $225,000 per year, depending upon how many we're purchasing. So that would range anywhere from $350 or $400 all the way up to $750 or $800, depending upon how many we're purchasing and for the size of the class. Teacher workstations and laptops, another $385,000. So you get an example of what we're talking about in terms of technology district-wide. So this is student-oriented technology that's utilized for the educative process and other things, of course, and this is staff-oriented technology as well as corresponding infrastructure. Some of the infrastructure that's highlighted would be data center updates. We've got a data center here at Lincoln High School and one off-site at Think Academy out in Rudolph. Updates to those data centers are estimated at $175,000. And updating network capabilities district-wide is an estimated $1.545 million. One of the thought processes around why these updates may be necessary has everything to do with how we're interacting and how we're engaging now. And frankly, if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's taught us the fact that basically ubiquitous access to reliable technology and internet and networks is really the only way we can do business. So you see a lot more video streaming, evidence tonight of how we're engaging in this presentation. These sorts of things go on in the classroom, and our expectations, what our kids have when they're interacting with technology here at school and of course here at home. If you take all of the total technology updates and add them together, you come up with $7.615 million. Quick, you might say, well, wait a second, you're going to spend $7.6 million on technology, but you're levying 10 over 5 years for curriculum as well. And I want to clarify, that's the total of these updates as we proceed through time. And very clearly, there's aspects of our Fund 10, our general fund budget, that are still going to be used for technology updates that may not come out of curriculum dollars. But I paint that picture just to let you know that we do have a significant need in that regard, and these additional dollars via a levy override referendum are going to help us meet those obligations. And we're still going to have to take general fund dollars, Fund 10 dollars that were supplied through the state funding formula and the normal mechanisms, and some dollars will be spent with regards to technology and curriculum through that process as well. The last operational referendum here at WRPS was in 2006. And since that time, if you've paid attention to the news and of course at the, at the legislature, at the legislative level, you recognize that there's been many, many school referenda on the ballot. And frankly, their success has been fairly decent at typically an 80+% passage rate. Part of the reasoning behind that, I think, is that we have opportunities to not increase folks' taxes and still capture needed dollars that we have to fund and operate the school district in the capacity that our community comes to expect. And that clearly is what the goal of this process is. You might also wonder, how did you last this long since 2006 by doing a referendum? And that basically was based on, once again, smart fiscal management and the work of our former business manager, Director of Business Services, Dan Wigan, and the board and other administration at that time. When that referendum in 2006 passed, they took out a loan against that referendum, invested that loan, and then had opportunities to spend that down over the course of the last 14 or so years. And to stretch those dollars for that period of time is indicative of good financial planning, sound decision making, and not the idea that, oh, we've just got a blank checkbook, so let's go to town. The idea of let's be responsible and ensure that we do exactly what we want to do, what we promise we are going to do the best we can for kids in the community, but be super smart while we're doing that. Question 2, so now we're shifting away from the bond issue question, we're shifting away from the levy override question and moving to the bond issue question. So this would be a separate question on the ballot. Once again, the total for that is $34 million. And it is comprised of a couple of different components. And again, I'll go through each of those individual components so that we can kind of ferret out and understand what specifically we're talking about. So first off, one aspect of the capital referendum or the debt issue referendum is for safety and security on our school buildings. And in a general sense, $12.7 million of that will be devoted towards modifying entrances. And one of the questions might be is, what do you mean by modifying entrances? So on the screen here, you can see what an example would be. This is just kind of a mock-up, and again, I'll go through each individual building so you'll know what your child's school might look like. But in general, what it is not only do we have the buzzer system that we have now, where you'd have to buzz to get in, but when the secured entrance, if this passes, when the secured entrances are installed, visitors to the school would have no other place to go aside from into the office. So on some of our schools, what we're talking about is a minor modification where you might have to change the positioning of some of the entrance doors and then add a door to the office area that's not there existing. And in other buildings, it means a complete repositioning of the office. And we'll go through and look at the floor plans, because in some cases, these are fairly simple renovations with not a significant dollar amount. In other cases, they're additions, and then there is a little bit more money involved in that. But these secure entrances would be updated on every building that houses kids. And again, that estimate is $12.7 million to make that happen. Then there's an aspect of educational space improvements here at Lincoln High School. That includes a renovation of the second floor science classrooms. Again, we'll get into the floor plan and look at what that means. This building here at Lincoln High School was built in 1979. In walking the halls of Lincoln High School and looking at the building from the outside, you certainly wouldn't guess that for those of you that have been around town since '79 and remember when Lincoln High School was New Lincoln High School. It looks a lot like it did back in those days, I can imagine, because our buildings and grounds maintenance crews and so forth have done an absolutely outstanding job with keeping our buildings up to date and making them look as though they were built not too long ago. With that said, however, there is some need, particularly in that second floor science area, because science just frankly is not undertaken as it was in 1979. So it's 2021, we're talking 42 years past the time that the building was built, and it's time to provide these updates, particularly in that science area, because of how science is undertaken now in the 21st century. Having done science classroom renovations in the past, a low estimate on what it takes to renovate just one classroom, just one science classroom, is about $250,000 to $300,000, and that is mostly incorporated in the cabinets and the countertops, as well as the infrastructure, the gas lines, the electricity, and so forth, to make sure that you have the capability to run and utilize the equipment you need to in a 21st century science classroom. And then also repositioning of the offices, the front entrance here at Lincoln High School, as well as this addition of a student resource center and a change where the library and media center is. We'll get into more of those details as well. Lastly, there's a portion of the dollars that are towards the addition of a gym at Think Academy. Think Academy is Rudolph Elementary. However, Think Academy is its name because several years ago, the district engaged in developing some charter schools. Rudolph Elementary at the time became Think Academy via that process, and it has been known as Think Academy ever since. But I can't emphasize enough, it is in fact Rudolph Elementary, and it serves the Rudolph and Vesper area. And that building itself, it houses just shy of 300 kids. Another point that I think is relevant that I'll throw out now is that the 7 elementaries that we currently operate all are either at or very near capacity. And we've seen district numbers, student numbers, for the most part playing out right around 5,050, 5,080, 5,100 in that ballpark. And if those numbers hold true, which we have every reason to believe they will, without massive and wild swings, because there's not anything on the horizon that would cause these massive swings, we're going to need to use every elementary building that we have to the capacity we're using them now, because as I mentioned, there are some buildings where we have some minor space issues, but there is not an elementary school that we operate where we have empty classrooms and space that we're just wondering what to do with. So that's absolutely an important piece. Why would a gym need to be added at Think Academy? When we get to that slide here later in the program, I'll explain that in more detail. So here we go. So what specifically are you talking about now? What does this mean for each school building? This is a first floor plan of Lincoln High School. And as you're looking at the screen there, I'm hoping the color it comes across online and on the screen would be kind of a reddish or an orange or a salmon color. If you see that color, that means addition. If you see a blue color, that means renovation. And then if you see kind of a tan color, that means reassignment. And with reference to the front of the building here, so you're looking at, if you're standing at the front entrance of Lincoln High School, that's what you're looking at. And if you're looking to your right then, that is the area that's at the bottom right of the screen. And if you're looking to your left, that's the area that's at the bottom left of the screen. So to the right, that's the educational space we're talking about, which is the media center being moved to the front of the building, and you can see the area to the right of that kind of spills into the existing commons and lunchroom area, offering this very nice and flexible space for kids and community, of course, to use. Think more of a resource center like on a college campus, or a vibe of a kind of a coffee shop, collaborative sort of space feeling versus the old media center or library where you have books, stacks of books in racks and quiet study tables. There'll be that opportunity too, as you can see to the left of that portion, but also the opportunity to have flexible spaces, collaboration, more access to technology and those sorts of things, as well as the coffee shop and other cool amenities for student use. Secondly, to the left of that salmon-colored area, that would be a repositioning of the office. So here at Lincoln, it is quite highlighted. why you would need to put an addition there. For anybody that comes through Lincoln High School, you know you get into the front doors, and as soon as you enter the front door currently, you have access to basically anywhere in the building. If you go left, you can head into the educational classroom areas. If you go right, you're right into the commons and then into the gym area fairly easily. You have to walk across that open hall in order to get to the office. So Lincoln is an example of how this entrance is repositioned, where the offices are moved to the front of the building, contiguous with the entrance. And hopefully you can see on the floor plan there how when entering, the first place that then folks are directed to go or that they'd have access to is that door to their left, front door, hang a left immediately, and I'm into the office reception area rather than into the building before I have to get to the office. So once again, this is the first floor of Lincoln. I forgot to mention, in the blue/tan areas you see then towards the middle of the screen, that would be existing office space that would be repurposed for other offices and personnel that currently could get moved around a bit. And so once again, this is the first floor of Lincoln High School. As you're looking at the building, to your right, new media center/student resource center. To your left, updated offices, and the office move is all about the secured entrance here at Lincoln High School. And this is, of course, a floor plan of the second floor. If you walked up to the second floor of Lincoln right now and looked at the science classroom, they would not have this configuration. So you would walk around that rectangle on the second floor, and you would identify that the science classrooms are in the center of the building, but there are not as many science classrooms pictured here, and they're not this same size. Part of the rationale around moving the Media Center library to the front of the building is because in renovating the science classrooms and providing them the space that they need, that takes up space of the existing Media Center. So on the left side of your screen, you can see where the blue kind of gets broken up a little bit with white interspersed in there. That, and then a little bit to the right of that is where the existing Media Center is, and then, of course, would no longer be under this renovation. Our science classrooms here at Lincoln High School are sized for about 24 students, and that would be like 12 pairs of lab partners. And what we're having with regular frequency here at Lincoln for a regular science classroom is anywhere between, sure, there can be some classes of 24, maybe 22, but it's fairly regular that we have 26, 27, 28, and perhaps 30. So these science classrooms are sized appropriately to meet the needs of a slightly larger class than was originally planned for the facility in 1979, as well as, more importantly, updated to 21st century standards with regard to the science classroom and doing science in this day and age versus 79. Also of note are a couple of additional collaborative areas that you can see in the light blue. The collaborative areas, would not just be for the science classrooms. Those would be for any teacher or class at Lincoln High School to use, where kids can go out there and do group work. You might bring your class out there to do a thing or two. Kids might hang out there when they have a brief period of time and chit-chat in between classes, whatever the case may be. So there is also some other minor modifications in addition to the science classroom renovations up there at Lincoln. Now getting to the heart of the matter on each individual building and what we're talking about specifics. The first example that we have here with regard to a secured entry is River Cities High School. And you can see, I forgot to mention on the prior slides, but those of you that are paying attention, you already realize this, but we have the corresponding dollar amount to each of these renovations associated with each slide. So River Cities is a fairly low dollar renovation to get the secured entrance because it again is about a repositioning of doors and maybe adding a doorway or two as is highlighted here in the blue. The estimated cost of that is about $85,000. Once again, that is just to get the secured entrance aspect implemented at River Cities. Rams, the middle school, a similar approach. The difference there is for $290,000, you're talking, of course, about a different building, and you're talking about a little bit of a different repurposing of what that reception area looks like as kids would walk in or parents would walk in, or visitors would walk into that office. Again, mostly renovation, and you see there's no pink or salmon colored because there's not an addition planned to get that secured entrance at Rams. Grant Elementary School, That's another example of where an addition would be necessary in order to provide a secured entrance, and that's because if you've been to Grant Elementary, you know that currently the office is kind of across the hall and down a little bit to the left. It's not contiguous with the entry. So you see that here highlighted in the pink or salmon color, and that means that it's an addition to that building explicitly to create a new office area and then create that secured entrance. The cost estimate there is $1.27 million. You can see the difference in cost based on a renovation versus, an addition, and that is necessitated by the development of the secured entrance. Grove Elementary, once again, going back to just a renovation because you're talking about repositioning doors and adding a doorway or two. So you can see what that looks like here. Once again, the estimate of what that work would take to make that happen goes down pretty significantly to $140,000. Howe Elementary, not to sound like a broken record, but here again, the office is across the hall and down a ways, so a new office would be constructed at Howe Elementary to create that secured entrance. The estimate there is about $1.38 million to make that happen. Then we get to Mead Elementary. And at Mead, there's a couple of different things going on. Thing number one would be the secured entrance. So you can see that left side, bottom of the screen in light blue and darker blue. Their office is contiguous with their entrance, but it would have to be modified in order to kind of force access into the office rather than into the building. But that's easily accomplished. And then you also see some blue and again that pink or salmon color associated with the current cafeteria area. And the bump out there, the addition, is to expand that cafeteria area at Mead Elementary. Mead Elementary is one of our largest elementary schools, and the cafeteria space in that school is undersized for the student population. And adding that portion there would simply facilitate, a much greater ease in getting kids in and out of the lunchroom, being able to serve more kids in the lunchroom at any one given time, shrinking down kind of lunch periods, post-pandemic, of course, when we have that capability, but just to create more space for a more functional lunchroom there, as well as a bit of renovation and repurposing of the existing lunchroom and that stage area that's used for some classroom space and other things currently. And here we have the Think Academy or Rudolph Elementary slide, and you can see based on the blue, there again, there's some modifications that can be made. The office is across the hall at Think Academy. However, there is also other offices that are contiguous with the entry. So we would capitalize on that, and we would make modifications there, making that more of the front office / reception area, and then the current office across the hall where the secretary and principal and so forth would be repurposed to, flip-flop kind of those offices. So we can accomplish that secure entrance with just a renovation rather than an addition. As I mentioned earlier, there's also plans, if this were to pass, for a full-size gym addition at Rudolph Think Academy, and the estimate there is $4.77 million to make that happen. Currently, Rudolph has a CAFNA gymnatorium, so that white portion that you see immediately to the left of the new pink or salmon colored addition is what their current cafeteria, gym, and kind of meeting space for if you're doing a whole school thing or a couple of grades. There's limitations as a result of that, and in order to then conduct FIAD and do the things they need to do, they got to take the tables up, put them down for lunch, take them back up, and so forth and so on. Plus, there's a lot of things that go on at Think Academy that bring people into the building, as there is in all of our elementary schools, and without having a full-size gym space to make that happen, it can make things pretty difficult. Lastly, another portion of the rationale behind this gym addition at Think out in Rudolph would be for community access to yet another nice space. Not only for community events, but of course for things like basketball practice, wrestling, whatever the case may be, so that community members and groups can use that new gym facility. Moving on through, once again, the continuing the secured entrance kind of approach, Washington Elementary. For those that have kids attending Washington or have been there, once again, that office is across the hall and across kind of a gathering area, or a vestibule area. And so in this regard, you have an addition once again, where a new office area is constructed to the right-hand side of where the entrance is, and then that creates this secured entrance, and then you have, of course, new office space where the principal, secretary, and other personnel are situated. Estimated cost there is just over $1 million. And then lastly, Woodside Elementary. There too is a renovation, and that renovation is as a result of the fact that the entrance is once again contiguous with the office. There is some commentary around other aspects of projects and potentially making modifications in buildings that where that may be needed for additional office space if that's undertakeable. And frankly, if the bond issue does pass and we identify that there's other things that we can do within the dollar amount that we have access to, then very clearly we're going to take advantage of that opportunity and make some of these modifications that are needed that might include things looking slightly different than what we're proposing here now. But what we do know is we're going to absolutely accomplish the tasks that have been outlined here tonight. Now getting into the nuts and bolts, which is, you mentioned at the beginning of the program that this can be done without any school tax base increase. And what does that mean? What does that look like? And again, as a result of defeasing existing debt, making good choices, responsible spending, and so forth, the district has engaged in multiple steps to position us well so that we can have something along these lines without a significant or truly any impact to local taxpayers with regard to their school portion of the tax levy. So you can see here, based on this graph, what our historic mill rates have been dating back to 2017. Most recently here in 2021, you can see we're at a 9.73. You can also see that in 22, if this were to pass, that the white with the lines through it, the hashed portions, would be the new levy override being approved and the $34 million bond issue being approved. And you can see how that kind of stacks up to put us in the same general vicinity as where we are now. So it remains 9.73 into the first year of the referenda being approved, and then the second year, and so forth. Individuals, of course, rightly so, would say, wait a second, you don't even know what the state budget is. They're working on that right now. And I would say, absolutely, you're correct. And frankly, there's nobody that knows exactly what the state budget's going to look like, when they develop the next biennial budget, much less, 3 or 4 or 5 years from now. But what we can do is base our projections based on some pretty solid evidence and what we've seen in the past. One of the pieces that I think is worth mentioning is that this 9.73, this consistent mill rate, is proposed as a bit of a high-end ceiling of what we anticipate. And the reason I say that is because if we were to pass a bond issue, this $34 million bond issue, and the levy override, you have the capability at moving some things around and implementing in a strategic fashion mechanisms to potentially defer a potential increase to the local mill rate, such that, as I'll give you an example. With the bond issue, it makes this quite a bit easier. Because initially, when granted a bond, the way that they're structured is typically you're required to pay interest only for the first interest only for the first 5 years or the first, 5 years of that bond. In this case, the interest-only payment is $840,000 for the first 5 years. When we put that into our school funding formula and we put a stagnant student count, so our student count just rolls forward. By the way, pupil count is calculated on a 3-year rolling average, so we're somewhat insulated from wild swings in pupil count. Additionally, if pupil count goes down, your levy goes down because your levy is based on the number of pupils you have, which means the school tax base would go down correspondingly. If the pupil count goes up, then your levy ability does go up. Once again, this projection, based on it being very similar to what it's been in the past, is an absolutely solid projection based on all of the available data that we have and the fact that it's calculated in a 3-year rolling average. Another impact to that number is the school property equalized property value. And for this exercise, what we use for an equalized property value is a flat number. So we took this year's equalized property value, cast it forward to next. If the bond issue were to pass, if both questions were to pass, the levy override and the bond issue, and we kept a flat property value, we kept flat student count, and we kept flat state aid, we would see a mill rate that's actually slightly less than 9.73 based on our calculations. So then I thought, okay, what about a doomsday scenario? What about, we're really in a budget circumstance that is tough at the state level, which may or may not transpire, particularly with the pandemic, and I can get into some details in that regard in just a second. But running this doomsday scenario, what I did was said, okay, by the way, equalized property values in the district and throughout the state have typically increased between, on the low end, 2% to maybe 3, 4, even 5 or 6% per year, and they've been on the rise. So the odds of the equalized property value actually going down or staying flat are really not good. But again, for the exercise of identifying what are the variables here, what I did was said, okay, we're going to have a 2% reduction in equalized property value and $1 million loss in state aid. $1 million loss in state aid and a 2% reduction in equalized property value. And then the projected mill rate, if both of these questions would pass, only then climbs to just slightly over 10. So from a 9.73 projected to just slightly over 10. And that would be under this catastrophic sort of scenario. Now, why would you say that $1 million aid reduction would be a catastrophic scenario? Because what we're hearing out of the state capitol, and very clearly, you don't really know until it's done what you've got. We could get a little additional aid, we could get no additional aid. And what we're hearing, a safe bet would be, is to simply plan on no increase. So if that's the case, if we're planning on no increase or no change in state aid, we're planning on our pupil count staying roughly the same, and we're planning on a slight increase to equalized property values, then our numbers are going to be right in that sweet spot, and in fact, likely slightly less than that. That again is because taking on this additional debt allows us the opportunity to have some other strings to pull with regard to funding. It's also replacing debt that had fallen off to a degree. And I would also mention that there is a certain amount of debt that is beneficial for school districts to have because we are aided. State aid is based on our debt payments as well. You want that proper kind of balance in order to maximize what we have in the aid formula. If you get more aid, you get less, less has to be made up in the local levy. So maximizing that over time makes all kinds of sense. Lastly, it also makes sense for our business office and our board to engage in a similar practice which they have in the past, and that is if this debt is incurred, that we take steps to defease it when and where possible, and thereby saving taxpayer dollars in doing that, because then we're saving money on interest payments. The most recent defeasance that we engaged in, which was just honestly about a month ago, saved roughly $100,000 to taxpayers in the form of deferred interest. So we didn't have to pay interest because we paid that bond a little bit early. And the district had engaged in that multiple times to kind of position us to where we are now. If that bond issue does pass, we would retain that capability, and as long as we have some ability in the levy to be within this 9.7-ish range, then I would guarantee you we're going to do that same thing and pay that down sooner than we would need to, thereby saving dollars in the form of deferred interest. So that for the most part, sums up everything that I had here tonight. Recognizing that we have folks in an online format, or those that may be viewing this later and then come up with questions, I'll provide you with my contact information. But prior to doing that, what I will mention is we have this meeting here tonight. There will be another meeting that's very similar to this on Tuesday, March 2nd at the middle school Rams Auditorium. That is at 6 p.m. And then we're going to come back here to the Performing Arts Center on Tuesday, March 16th at 6 p.m. again for one final opportunity. In the interim, at that time or at any time between now and April 6th, you've got my contact information here. Feel free to visit the website. There's a referendum informational portion of our website that's available. The contact number is there, as well as my email, and of course our social media presence. So any of those mechanisms by which you would like to ask questions, I would invite you to do so. I would absolutely turn it over now to the audience for questions, but based on what we're seeing here in the audience, there probably isn't a ton. So with that, I will wrap up and just simply encourage folks with questions to bring them my direction, and we will absolutely do our best to answer them. Thank you so much for the time. Have a good night.